There's a misconception about retirement. People think it's an ending, a slow, gentle fading into the sunset. They are mistaken. For a mind that has spent 40 years building, innovating, and fighting, retirement is not an ending. It is the ultimate luxury. It is the transition from the battlefield to the observation tower. From this vantage point, high up in my glass house overlooking the Pacific, I could see the whole board, every move, every player, every predictable, foolish mistake. My name is Catherine Hayes. 20 years ago, my late husband, David, and I founded a company called Helios Innovations on a simple, radical idea and a second mortgage. David was the heart of the company, the charismatic leader who could inspire loyalty with a single speech. I was its brain. I wrote the code for our first prototype on this very kitchen table. I structured the deals that took us public. I designed the corporate charter, weaving into it a series of checks and balances, of fail-safes and hidden clauses, because I knew that the greatest threat to any legacy is not a competitor, but the arrogance of the generation that inherits it. If you are listening to this, please consider subscribing. This is a story for anyone who has ever been told they are out of touch by the very people they taught how to walk. It's a story about my children, Leo and Sophie. And it's about the day they decided to sell my life's work for a pittance, not knowing that from my beautiful, quiet observation tower, I still had my finger on the self-destruct button. My children's visits had become a predictable, quarterly ritual. They would fly in from the city, their expensive, dark-colored city clothes a stark contrast to the sun-bleached whites and blues of my coastal life. They did not come to connect. They came to report. And, increasingly, to manage me. This visit was no different. They arrived on a Tuesday, bringing with them the frantic, anxious energy of the city. Leo, my son, is a man who wears his ambition like an ill-fitting suit. He has all the buzzwords of a modern CEO: synergy, disruption, agile, but none of the quiet, steely vision of his father. Sophie, my daughter, is sharper, more clinical. She sees the world as a series of assets to be optimized, including, it seemed, her own mother. "Mother, you look well," Leo began, kissing the air near my cheek as they walked onto my terrace. "The sea air agrees with you." "The sea air doesn't have board meetings," I replied with a wry smile, pouring them glasses of iced tea. "About that," Sophie said, getting straight to the point as she always did. She pulled a tablet from her designer tote bag. "We need to discuss the Q3 strategy. The board feels we need a more aggressive approach." For the past year, since I had stepped back from daily operations to my role as founding advisor, my children had been systematically dismantling the slow-growth, debt-averse, innovation-focused culture I had built. They were chasing trends, pouring money into flashy marketing campaigns for half-baked products, and trying to turn our legacy of thoughtful innovation into a fast-fashion tech company. Every remote board meeting was the same. I would dial in from my study, a calm, silver-haired face on a large screen, and I would listen to them present their latest, disruptive strategy. "We need to pivot to the metaverse, Mother," Leo had insisted at the last meeting. "It's the future." "The metaverse, Leo," I had replied calmly, "is currently a very expensive video game with bad graphics. Our core business is in secure data storage for the healthcare industry. Let's focus on our strengths." "That's exactly the kind of legacy thinking that's holding us back," he'd argued, his voice rising. "You're too risk-averse. You're out of touch with the new market realities." The other board members, a collection of yes-men my children had appointed, would nod in solemn agreement. My voice, the voice of the woman who had built the very company they were mismanaging, had become a quaint, easily dismissed whisper from the past. Now, on my terrace, Sophie tapped on her tablet, bringing up a series of dizzying charts and graphs. "The numbers are flat, Mother. We need to make a bold move to excite the shareholders. We've had an offer." My blood ran cold, but I kept my expression serene. "An offer? From whom?" "A private equity firm," Leo said, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "Blackwood Capital. They see our potential. They want to acquire us, take us private, and streamline operations." "Streamline operations," I repeated, the corporate euphemism for firing loyal, long-term employees. "And at what price are they valuing my life's work?" Sophie and Leo exchanged a quick, uncomfortable glance. It was Sophie who finally spoke. $1 million, she said, her voice carefully neutral. I just stared at them. $1 million. For a company with a portfolio of patents worth 50 times that, a company with zero debt and a client list that was the envy of the industry. It wasn't a business deal. It was a fire sale. It was a betrayal. They believe the company is undervalued due to its outdated operational model, Sophie explained, avoiding my eyes. They see it as a fixer-upper. The $1 million is just the initial price. The real value is in the speed of the transaction, allowing us to liquidate and reinvest in more agile ventures. I see, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. And you, as the board, have considered this insulting offer? We haven't just considered it, Mother, Leo said, his voice taking on a new, defiant tone. We held a vote. He was enjoying this, the final, triumphant act of pushing the old queen off the chessboard. There was an emergency board meeting yesterday afternoon. Sophie elaborated, her tone clinical. Given the time-sensitive nature of the offer, we had to act quickly. The vote was unanimous. We've agreed to the sale. They had done it. They had convened a secret meeting, a corporate coup, to sell my legacy for pennies on the dollar. They had looked at 40 years of sweat, innovation, and sacrifice, and they had put a price tag on it that was nothing short of an insult. You held a vote without the founding advisor present? I asked, my voice as cold and calm as the sea in winter. Your input was considered, Leo said, a blatant lie. I could almost hear the real conversation in that boardroom. She's too old to stop us. Her sentimentality is a liability. It's time to move on. I stood up and walked to the edge of my terrace, looking out at the endless, powerful Pacific. I could feel their eyes on my back, expecting an explosion. They expected tears, or anger, or a futile, desperate plea. They expected the heartbroken mother. They had forgotten about the ruthless CEO. I stood there for a long moment, the sea breeze gently tossing my silver hair. Then, I turned back to them. I was not crying. I was smiling. A calm, serene, and utterly unreadable smile. All right, I said, my voice soft. If the board has spoken, then the board has spoken. You must do what you believe is best. They stared at me, utterly baffled. They had prepared for a storm, and I had given them a calm sea. My easy surrender was more disorienting than any fight could have been. So, you're okay with this? Leo asked, his voice laced with disbelief. I am tired, my dears, I said with a weary sigh. Perhaps you are right. Perhaps I am out of touch. My time for fighting these battles is over. I walked back and picked up the teapot. More iced tea? That evening, after they had left, buzzing with the thrill of their easy victory, I sat in my study and watched the sunset paint the ocean in hues of orange and purple. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully sidelined the old woman and her sentimental ideas. They had forgotten about the corporate charter. They had forgotten about the bylaws I had written myself, late at night, all those years ago. They had forgotten about the tiny, almost invisible clause I had inserted on page 47. A clause I had named, in a fit of private legal poetry, the founder's prerogative. I picked up my phone. I scrolled through my contacts, past the names of my children, past the names of my board members, until I found a name I had not called in a very long time. The phone rang twice, and then a familiar, booming voice answered. Catherine Hayes, the voice said. I was wondering when you were finally going to get bored of the beach and call me. I smiled. Julian, I said. How would you like to buy a company? Julian Croft and I had been rivals, friends, and intellectual sparring partners for over 30 years. He was the only other person in the industry whose mind I truly respected. A brilliant predator who, like me, saw the corporate world not as a series of spreadsheets, but as a grand, intricate chessboard. My call to him was not a plea for help. It was a signal to a fellow grandmaster that the game was afoot. They're selling it for $1 million, Julian, I told him, the sea breeze carrying my words out into the twilight. There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line, followed by a low, appreciative whistle. $1 million? He finally said. My God, Catherine, they're not just selling the golden goose, they're selling it for the price of a single feather. What do you want me to do? I want you to prepare an offer, I said calmly. A real one. 100 million. All cash. Have your lawyers draft the letter of intent, but do not, under any circumstances, send it yet. I have a few pieces I need to move into position first. Consider it done, he said, a note of sheer delight in his voice. He understood immediately. This wasn't just a business transaction. It was theater. Let me know when the curtain goes up. The next morning, I initiated the first phase of my counter-move, tactical surrender. I called a joint video conference with Leo and Sophie. I composed my face into a mask of weary resignation. I let a slight tremor enter my voice. My dears, I began, looking into the camera in my study. I've had some time to think about our conversation, and you were right. I saw them exchange a quick, triumphant glance. They were sitting together in the main boardroom of Helios Innovations, my old boardroom, looking powerful and in control. I am tired, I continued, selling the performance with a heavy sigh. These new market realities, the speed of it all, it's a young person's game. The company needs new blood, a new vision. My time has passed. I accept the board's decision. I will not stand in the way of the sale. The relief on their faces was palpable. It was so pure, so absolute, it was almost comical. They had been expecting a protracted legal battle, a messy emotional fight. Instead, I had handed them a swift, unconditional surrender. They were so blinded by their own arrogance, so certain of my irrelevance, that they couldn't see the glaring red flag in my easy capitulation. Thank you, Mother, Leo said, his voice dripping with condescending magnanimity. This is for the best. We knew you'd see reason. We'll make sure you are well taken care of from the proceeds, Sophie added, a patently false promise. I know you will, my dear, I said softly. Just do an old woman a favor. The final signing with Blackwood Capital. I would like to be there, just to say a final goodbye to the company, in person. They looked at each other again. My presence was an inconvenience, but a small one. A final, sentimental request from the old queen they had so easily deposed. It would be a perfect final scene for their victory narrative. Of course, Mother, Sophie said, a gracious smile on her face. The signing is at the law offices of Thorne and Associates, Friday at 3 p.m. We'll see you there. With the enemy thoroughly disarmed and lulled into a false sense of security, I moved on to phase 2. I spent the next 2 days on the phone, not with bankers or brokers, but with the quiet, unassuming foot soldiers who truly run any company. The executive assistants, the senior engineers, the head of HR people who had been with me for 20 years, people whose loyalty was to the legacy of the company, not to the whims of its temporary managers. I didn't ask them to commit treason. I simply asked questions about morale, about the specifics of the Blackwood deal, about the severance packages being offered to long-term employees. The picture they painted was a grim one. My children were not just selling the company, they were gutting it. Key research divisions were to be eliminated. The generous pension plan David and I had established was being dissolved. They were selling the building's body and discarding its soul. My final and most important call was to my personal lawyer, a quiet, methodical man named Elias. Elias, I said, I need you to find me the original corporate charter of Helios Innovations, the one I drafted in 2002. Specifically, I need you to find page 47, section 8, subclause C. There was a rustling of papers on his end. Ah, yes, he said after a moment, his voice filled with a lawyer's appreciation for a well-crafted trap. The founder's prerogative. I always wondered if you'd ever have to use this. It's a beautiful piece of legal work, Catherine. Isn't it? I said with a smile. Please have the necessary documents drafted and be at Thorne and Associates on Friday at 2:45 p.m. and bring your best fountain pen. I believe we have a signing to attend to. The day of the signing arrived. I chose my outfit carefully. A simple, elegant white linen suit. I wanted to look serene, almost angelic. A vision of grandmotherly innocence. I walked into the grand, glass-walled conference room at Thorne and Associates to find the scene already set. The lawyers for Blackwood Capital were on one side of the massive table, looking smug and predatory. On the other side sat my children. Leo was exuding an air of self-importance, laughing a little too loudly at a joke one of the bankers made. Sophie was all business, her tablet open, her expression sharp and focused. They were playing the part of titans of industry, and they were playing it badly. They both looked up as I entered, a flicker of annoyance crossing their faces before they replaced it with polite smiles. "Mother," Sophie said, standing. "So glad you could make it. We're just waiting for the final documents to be brought in." She gestured to a chair at the far end of the table, a seat clearly meant for an unimportant observer. "Thank you, dear," I said, but I did not sit down. I simply remained standing, a calm, quiet presence in the room. A paralegal brought in the final contract, a document as thick as a phone book, and placed it in the center of the table. The Blackwood partner pushed it towards Leo. "Your signature here, Mr. Hayes, as CEO." Leo picked up the expensive pen, his hand trembling slightly with excitement. This was his moment, the culmination of his grand vision. He was about to sign away his father's legacy, and he couldn't have been prouder. He uncapped the pen. The room was silent. And just as the nib was about to touch the paper, the doors to the conference room swung open. Friday arrived, a day of brilliant, cloudless blue sky that felt like a mockery of the storm that was about to break. I chose my outfit with the precision of a general dressing for a decisive battle. I wore a simple, elegant white linen suit. I wanted to look serene, almost angelic, a vision of grandmotherly innocence. It was the perfect camouflage. My armor was not in the clothes I wore, but in the knowledge I held. The law offices of Thorne and Associates were a monument to corporate power, all glass and steel and cold, modern art. It was a place designed to intimidate, to remind you of your own insignificance in the grand machinery of law and commerce. As I walked into the grand, glass-walled conference room on the top floor, I found the scene already set. On one side of a ridiculously long, polished mahogany table sat the team from Blackwood Capital. They were all young, aggressive-looking men in identical dark suits, their faces alight with the smug, predatory thrill of an easy kill. They were getting a multi-million-dollar tech company for the price of a rounding error, and they knew it. On the other side sat my children. Leo was leaning back in his chair, exuding an air of self-importance, laughing a little too loudly at a joke one of the bankers made. He was playing the part of the visionary young CEO who had made the tough but necessary decision. Sophie was all business, her tablet open, her expression sharp and focused, occasionally firing off a sharp, incisive question to the lawyers. They were playing the part of titans of industry, and in their own minds, they were giving Oscar-worthy performances. They both looked up as I entered. I saw a flicker of annoyance cross their faces, the kind one gets when an irrelevant extra wanders into a key scene. They quickly masked it with polite, condescending smiles. "Mother," Sophie said, standing as a gesture of feigned respect. "So glad you could make it. We're just waiting for the final documents to be brought in." She gestured to a single isolated chair at the far end of the table, a seat clearly meant for an unimportant observer, far from the center of power. "Thank you, dear," I said, my voice soft, but I did not sit down. I walked slowly along the side of the room, my hand trailing lightly over the back of the empty chairs until I came to stand behind the seat directly opposite Leo. I simply remained standing there, a calm, quiet presence, an unspoken challenge to the seating arrangement they had presumed for me. My quiet act of defiance made them uncomfortable. I could see Leo shifting in his seat. Sophie's smile tightened. Before they could say anything, a paralegal entered, her arms laden with a stack of documents as thick as a phone book. She placed it with a heavy, definitive thud in the center of the table. The final contract. The lead partner from Blackwood Capital, a man with slicked-back hair and the eyes of a shark, pushed the signature page towards Leo. "Your signature here, Mr. Hayes, as CEO and acting chairman," he said, his voice smooth and final. Leo picked up the expensive fountain pen left on the table. His hand trembled slightly, not with nerves, but with the sheer, unadulterated thrill of victory. This was his moment, the culmination of his grand vision. The moment he finally, officially, stepped out of his father's shadow by dismantling his father's legacy. He was about to sign away 40 years of our lives, and he couldn't have been prouder. He uncapped the pen. The room was utterly silent, the only sound the faint hum of the building's ventilation system. And just as the gold nib was about to touch the crisp, white paper, the double doors to the conference room swung open with a soft, authoritative whoosh. The man who walked into the room was my lawyer, Elias, his expression grim and professional. He was followed by the one man my children never expected to see, Julian Croft. Julian strode into the room like a force of nature, a tech billionaire with a reputation for ruthless efficiency and a booming laugh that could shatter glass. He and my late husband, David, had been the two great lions of the tech industry for decades, fierce rivals in the boardroom and the best of friends on the golf course. He was the one man in the industry my children both feared and desperately, pathetically, wanted to impress. His entrance had the effect of a lit match in a room full of dynamite. The Blackwood Capital lawyers straightened their ties, their smug expressions shifting instantly to ones of cautious respect. My son Leo froze completely, the pen hovering over the contract, his face a mask of utter, dumbfounded shock. Sophie's eyes widened, her clinical composure finally cracking, revealing the panicked young strategist beneath. "Julian," Leo stammered, scrambling to his feet, a sycophantic smile plastered on his face. What a surprise! What are you doing here?" Julian Croft, in a magnificent display of corporate power, completely ignored him. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, scanned the room, passed over the Blackwood lawyers with utter disinterest, and then settled on me. A wide, genuine, and deeply amused smile broke across his face. "Catherine, my dear," he boomed, his voice filling the room as he walked over and enveloped me in a warm, familiar hug. "You look magnificent. Retirement suits you." "It has its moments, Julian," I replied with a calm smile, patting his arm. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." Sophie, ever the strategist, quickly recovered from her shock, trying to seize control of a narrative that was rapidly slipping from her grasp. "Mr. Croft," she said, her voice a little too high. "What a surprise. We're just in the middle of a signing. A private acquisition." She said the word private, as if to warn him away, to re-establish the illusion of her own importance. This was the moment, the beginning of the end. The curtain was about to go up on the final act of their little tragedy. Julian Croft turned away from me, his expression shifting from warm amusement to a look of profound, almost theatrical disappointment. He walked over to the conference table, and with a casual air that was utterly dismissive, he picked up the Blackwood Capital contract. He flipped through the first few pages, his eyes scanning the numbers. Then he let out a short, sharp laugh of pure derision. $1 million? He said, his voice echoing in the stunned silence. He looked up, not at my children, but directly at the lead partner from Blackwood. "For this company? Gentlemen, I've seen you pay more for a catered lunch. This isn't an acquisition, it's grave robbing." The Blackwood partner's face turned a dangerous shade of red. He stood up, puffing out his chest. "This is a confidential negotiation, Mr. Croft. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." "I'm sure you are," Julian retorted, his friendly demeanor vanishing, replaced by the cold, hard authority of a man who could buy and sell everyone in the room without breaking a sweat. "But you see, I have a vested interest in this company's future. And as for you, gentlemen," he gestured to the Blackwood team, "it's about to become a very public humiliation if you don't pack up your little contract and your insulting offer and leave. Now." He then turned his devastating attention to my children. "And as for you two," he said, his voice dripping with contempt, "your father was my friend. He was a lion. And you are nothing but scavenging hyenas, picking at the bones of his legacy. Did you really think you could sell your mother's company without her final say?" This was my cue, the moment for the quiet, underestimated old woman to finally speak. I stepped forward, my voice soft but carrying across the silent room with perfect clarity. "That won't be necessary, Julian," I said, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "I believe I can handle this." All eyes in the room swiveled to me. The sentimental ghost had just taken center stage. "Leo, Sophie," I said, my voice gentle but laced with a new kind of steel they had never heard before. "I believe there has been a slight misunderstanding. You see, When your father and I founded Helios Innovations, we did so with a vision of the future, not just for the company, but for our family. And your father, being a wise man, knew that sometimes children can be short-sighted. I walked over to the table and placed a single, thin folder in front of my own lawyer, Elias, who had been standing silently by the door. Elias, if you would be so kind as to direct everyone's attention to page 47, section 8, subclause C of the Helios Innovations Corporate Charter. Elias, with the quiet satisfaction of a lawyer who knows the game is already won, opened the folder. His voice was as dry and precise as old parchment. Of course, Catherine. Ladies and gentlemen, the corporate charter of Helios Innovations, drafted by Mrs. Hayes herself in 2002, contains a unique provision. Subclause C, henceforth known as the founder's prerogative, stipulates that in the event of a proposed sale of the company to a third party, any founding member living or deceased, represented by their designated heir, retains a one-time, non-transferable right to veto the sale. The color drained from Leo's face. Sophie stared at me, her mouth slightly agape, her clinical composure finally shattering. They had forgotten. In their rush to liquidate their legacy, in their arrogant certainty of my irrelevance, they had forgotten the very rules of the game I had written. Furthermore, Elias continued, his voice unwavering, upon invoking this veto, the founding member is automatically granted the right to purchase all outstanding board shares at the current, publicly declared valuation, thus consolidating a majority controlling interest. He paused and tapped the Blackwood contract with his finger. A valuation which you, Leo and Sophie, and your board have conveniently and publicly declared to be $1 million. The trap had sprung. It was a beautiful, elegant, and utterly merciless checkmate. I had not needed to fight them. I had simply let them set their own price for their own defeat. So, let me be clear, I said, my voice cutting through their stunned silence. I looked first at the furious Blackwood lawyers. Gentlemen, as the founding member, I am officially invoking the founder's prerogative. The sale to your firm is vetoed. It is null and void. Thank you for your time, but your business here is concluded. Without another word, they began to gather their briefcases, their expressions thunderous. They knew they had been outplayed not by a rival firm, but by the quiet old woman they hadn't even noticed. Second, I continued, turning my gaze to my children, who now looked like terrified statues carved from ice. I am exercising my right to purchase your shares, and the shares of your compliant board members, at the price you so helpfully established. My lawyer will have the paperwork, and a check for $1 million, drawn up by the end of the day. You will receive your 30 pieces of silver. Mother, you can't, Sophie whispered, her voice cracking with desperation. That's theft. No, my dear, I replied calmly, the smile never leaving my face. Theft is what you tried to do to me, to your father's legacy, and to the loyal employees of this company. This is simply a lesson in valuation. A lesson about the difference between a price tag and true worth. I paused, letting the weight of my next words sink in. A lesson that has just cost you $99 million. Leo finally found his voice, a bewildered, pathetic squeak. What, 99 million? I just smiled, and then I looked at my oldest and dearest friend, Julian Croft. Julian, I said, I believe you have an offer to make. Julian Croft's booming, celebratory laugh filled the conference room, a sound of pure, unadulterated victory. He strode to the table and, with a theatrical flourish, he pulled a new, far more elegant contract from his own leather briefcase. He slid it across the polished mahogany surface, and it came to a stop directly in front of me. As the new, undisputed, sole owner of Helios Innovations, he announced to the shattered remnants of the room, Catherine has just accepted a real offer, $100 million. From me? The deal was contingent, of course, on her successfully reconsolidating control. He grinned, looking directly at my children. Which, thanks to your breathtaking incompetence and greed, she has just done. The final, devastating truth landed on my children like a physical blow. They stared at the new contract, at the impossible number of zeros, their faces a grotesque mask of shattered ambition and abject horror. They had been so close, they had tasted the victory, only to have it turn to ash in their mouths. They hadn't just lost the company, they had actively, willingly, handed it to me on a silver platter for a fraction of its worth, facilitating my own triumph. "But we're your children," Leo finally managed to say, the words sounding pathetic and hollow even to his own ears. "The company, it was our birthright." I finally looked at him, truly looked at him, and the last vestiges of a mother's soft spot hardened into something else. "A birthright, Leo, is earned through loyalty and respect, not simply through an accident of birth," I said, my voice cold and clear. "Your father left you with every opportunity, every advantage. He left you a legacy, and you tried to sell it for parts. You confused inheritance with entitlement. You saw a quick dollar. I saw a legacy." I picked up the elegant fountain pen that Elias had brought for me. "This," I said, looking from Leo to Sophie, whose face was now streaked with silent, furious tears, "is not a punishment. It is a business decision. The best business decision for the future of this company. You have both proven, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that you are not fit to lead it." With a steady hand, I signed the contract with Julian. The stroke of the pen was firm, decisive. It was the sound of a 40-year-old story reaching its proper conclusion. "Elias," I said, turning to my lawyer, "please ensure that Leo and Sophie's checks are delivered to them by messenger. They will, of course, be required to tender their resignations from the board, effective immediately. Their access to the building and its systems has already been revoked." Sophie let out a small, strangled gasp. Not only had she lost the fortune, she had lost her job, her title, her entire identity. "As for the other board members who voted for this disastrous sale," I continued, my voice unwavering, "please inform them that their positions are under review. I will be restructuring the board next week." I then turned to my son one last time. The anger was gone, replaced by a deep, profound, and weary sadness. "You asked me once what I did all day, alone in my house by the sea," I said quietly. "I read, I think, and I remember every single lesson your father ever taught me about business and about character. It's a shame you weren't paying attention." Without another word, I gathered my purse, gave Julian a warm, grateful nod, and walked out of the conference room. I did not look back. I left them there, in the cold, glass-walled room, surrounded by the wreckage of their own greed. I left them with their $1 million a fortune to some, but to them, it would forever be a symbol of the 99 million they had lost through their own arrogance. As I stepped out into the bright afternoon sun, I felt a lightness I hadn't felt in years. I had not just saved my company, I had reclaimed my own story. They had tried to write the final chapter for me, a sad little epilogue about a forgotten old woman. But they had forgotten one crucial detail. I was the one who had written the book in the first place. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your own story in the comments. Your voice, believe me, always matters.